One of the more fascinating trends human beings display is an overwhelming tendency to look back to the past and try to retrace the steps that led to an unfortunate event or series of events, or even the current state of affairs in their own lives. People often tell themselves, it was at that point in time when X person was age 19 that Y went wrong, and because of that it started a chain reaction and everything fell apart. And of course the feeling of regret is deeply linked to that without question. And humans of all flavors and stripes do this. We as a species tend to look back at the past and try to figure out what might have gone wrong in order to perhaps improve the current situation, or more importantly, the future. We tend to do this. And of course, it is an exercise in futility. The past is irretrievable and we can't change it. And one commentary that I think is important to make is that when looking at the past, we should observe general trends as opposed to specific events. Now, I'm not claiming that there's no such thing as a keystone event. There very well can be, and it does happen. But usually what makes or breaks an individual is the general trend over a longer period of time. Not one singular event, but the perpetuation of similar events that lead to a certain outcome. But even observing that, the past is irretrievable. It is an exercise in futility. And extrapolating from what individuals do when they think about recounting their lives and what went wrong here or there, we as a species tend to do this as a collective. It's one of the fascinating things that historians like to do. They'd like to look at the past and hypothesize that had X variable not been in place or been done differently, Y might have occurred in a different way. And it's interesting. It is ultimately just mental masturbation because everything in the past is irretrievable. But we do this because we have a fascination with it. And it also gives us the illusion of agency, the idea that somehow we can reach back into the past and change things fundamentally with an eye towards the future, always to the future, or the present for that matter. However poorly defined the present might be, we have this saying, of course, that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it, and that's kind of true. But what I said before about individuals in terms of trends is even more valid, in my humble opinion, for civilizations and humanity, the species. It's rarely one event, one keystone event, that sets off everything. In contrast, it is a series of events. And one of the things I've observed in the past 5 years or so, in traditionalist camps and people who lament the status quo of the postmodern world, and there are many things lamentable about it, I don't deny that, is the somewhat wistful attempt at looking at the past and trying to figure out what went wrong or who did what in order to bring about the current state of affairs. People tend, just like individuals, to get locked down on singular events. And sometimes this makes sense. So, for example, I would argue that it probably is the case that the Treaty of Versailles, had it been scripted differently or offered in a different way or not offered at all, that quite possibly World War II might have been avoided. Maybe. But we'll never know. There are keystone events, I concede that. But if you look at the broad trend of civilization as something that probably had a much bigger influence on the current state of decay, if you wish to call it that, the quote-unquote degeneration, and the chaos, and the depression, and the unhappiness, and all these things that are very much hidden behind many layers in our world, because it's not often seen in public, then you have to look at the broad trends. Some people would like to say, oh, it was Napoleon, it was this point in time. It was progressive Christianity. It was whatever. Maybe, maybe not. More likely, all these things probably played a contributing role to the current state of affairs. But as the past is irretrievable and unalterable, ultimately, it's just a thought experiment, it's just mental masturbation. So what do we do with that? Well, observing trends can be helpful, but I think ultimately it's only helpful at the level of individuals. So to go back to the individual level, if you've observed a destructive trend in your life, say with alcohol consumption, which is very common, and I would argue just by dint of its widespread use, the most pernicious and destructive drug on offer, then you as an individual might have the possibility to change that and alter the course of your alcohol consumption. Would that be just as effective for the rest of society? Almost certainly not, for all sorts of obvious reasons I don't think I need to point out. And the same is true with all the negative trends we observe, whether it's the dysfunctionality of the mating market, something that we all talk about very often, something we've been talking about for years, or the extreme polarity found in politics, the polarization effect of left versus right, and the absolute looniness of the current left. Well, you have to observe trends there. The trend, the obvious trend I have to observe again and again, is that as civilization grows safer and more secure, and people have fewer concerns, fewer overt dangers that they have to react to, feel the need to react to, that creates fertile grounds for the kind of strange leftism we observe, the SJWism, the extremes of just not offending anyone. Because whereas there used to be real dangers, now the danger is in saying the wrong word at the wrong time in the wrong place. There's always going to be the risk that as civilization grows safer and more comfortable, that in lieu of real dangers, things that were actually harmful and very risky, people transform that into perceptive dangers. And I'll say perceptive dangers because it's not entirely clear whether you're using the right gender pronoun or describing a person's ethnicity correctly or whatever, if that represents a proper danger, not in the same sense as roving robber bandits or dangerous carnivores out in the savannah posing a legitimate threat to you. No, these are very, very different things indeed. Well, that seems to be the trend. More right-leaning tendencies of the conservative sort and others, well, these typically are things that emerge in an environment that is much more infused by legitimate danger. When challenge of any sort is left by the wayside, people tend to flounder in their own comfort. It's the eternal struggle of civilization. Man attempts to remove himself from his primeval state, moving ever more rapidly towards a state of civilization away from the tooth and claw of nature. But a seeming natural consequence of that is that we shift our mentality and our perceptual apparatus to see things quite differently indeed. So if we want to be those people who look at that watershed moment where everything just fell apart, well, I don't think we can be those people. We just don't know. And though we had a brief respite with the emergence of this pandemic from all the SJW stuff and their ruination of the entertainment industry, games, film, etc., we bore witness to other things, the rise of even more online thoughterry, and strangeness in the form of excessive simping. At the end of the day, to quote the musical artist Assemblage 23, regret is a dull and rusty blade that covers me in scars that never fade. There's no way past this, not the macro level, because what it ultimately boils down to, as it always does, is you, the individual, and specifically you, the individual man. You're not going to change the world. We're not going to change the world. No matter how many times people online might lament whatever might have happened in the past, or the emergence of some technology. We can observe it, yes. We can comment on it, yes. We might even be so bold as to make predictions about certain trends and developments. Yes, we can do all of that. But we're not going to fundamentally change the fabric of civilization. However we might feel about the way things are going and the direction things are going in. It simply is what it is. And I'm not saying embrace it, but I think we do need to embrace the fact that we have the most malleability and modularity as individuals in this giant morass, in this giant stew of civilization. Not as collectives and not as groups, because that would require you harnessing far more than you have access to. And taking that into account, things become a lot clearer. So, for example, if you're of a more traditionalist bent, then yes, you can pursue that dream family, but with the full knowledge of what it might cost you. Or alternatively, pursue it in a way that would reduce the risks to an absolute minimum. All these things are theoretical options. But what I'm trying to tell you, whatever your personal lamentation might be, or the lamentations of the masses, it won't change anything. We're very much stuck in the place we are because of that almost unstoppable trajectory of human history. Now, on a final note, there are many people who lament the current state of affairs and long for the past. Well, what do they long for in the past? They might long for certain traditional arrangements, some other cultural practices, but they also long for plagues and starving to death, short and brutish lives of the sort that were absolutely the mainstay of human history and prehistory up until now. I doubt it. If you look at the span of the Roman Empire, it is chock full, for example, of plagues, disasters, pestilence, food shortages, you name it. Is that what you want to return to? Or maybe you want to return to 1600? Well, I have news for you. It wasn't that much different back then. What point of time do you wish to return to when things were quote-unquote better? Now, it might have been that they were better in certain ways, but not in all the other ways that you're discounting. Everything is a trade-off. Everything is a double-edged sword. Trade one thing, lose something else. And I think that's the ultimate lesson to be learned from history. There's only the perceived present and looking forward, and trying to learn from general trends in as much as they can affect your life as an individual. And people who do long for the past, well, this longing must be tempered by an understanding of just how horrible in most ways the past was, apart from all the things that you might cherish. Anyway, gentlemen, you take care, and if I'm still alive, I will check you out later. As always, may the gods watch over you, and bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.